So I want to welcome everybody to tonight for our Works for Me family engagement training. We are having a guest speaker tonight. We're going to be talking about special needs trusts and stable accounts. As I'm a parent, I'm the family mentor for the Works for Me program and and parent trainer. But one of the things that I have found is as your child gets into the workforce, or you're looking at work, or even going through life in general and challenges, we need to know these avenues for the financial side of um, our decisions. We need to know where we can put our money, what can we do, how do we plan. There's so many things to think about for the current, before, during, and after. So I invited Laura Drake here. I'll let her introduce herself, but I invited her to tell you a little bit about special needs trusts and stables accounts, what they are and how they work. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura because I know we have a lot to go over. And also, if you can write down your questions during the session, once we are done the recording, we'll open it up for questions at the end. So keep your questions on hand till the end of the recording. So thank you. Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Drake. I'm an attorney in Cincinnati. And I got into this field because I had an aunt who was developmentally disabled, and I had a brother who had mental health issues that, stopped him staying in the workforce for any length of time. And so growing up, my dad was very active in the whole idea about how to provide for and all this. And when my grandparents passed away, um, they were only 52 years old. So my aunt was just 30 and or just 31. And so their only option at that time was to disinherit her. That's what you had to do in 1972. You had to disinherit somebody because there was no mechanism to leave money to them otherwise. And that has changed, obviously, dramatically. Um, but more recently than you think, it started in the early 90s that the courts gave us an option. The legislature gave us an option to do a special needs trust that has a lot of really good options. I am going to say, as an aside, that I have 5 dogs in my house. They're not all mine, and they're not all mine, but like there's one right there. You can see them in the back behind me. they're they're gonna come and go. I foster anyway. So just ignore them. But you can ask questions about them later. After we're done, I'll tell you all their names and all the interesting things about them, and I can show you the puppy who's available for adoption. So she's very cute. So anyway, that's how I got into this world, is because I watched my dad try to provide for my brother. I watched my grandparents who were not able to provide for my aunt. They just had to disinherit her, and the intent was that my mom and my uncle each inherited 50%, and they should have given about a quarter of theirs to their sister, right? But my mom thought they could never have given enough to her sister, and my uncle felt that they gave more than enough to her, and that created that kind of tension. Those things shouldn't happen anymore. There's no reason to disinherit someone. There's no reason to say I'll give it to my typical kids and they'll take care of my special needs child, because even if they would, by the way, they often won't, but even if they would, stuff happens. They're in an accident, they pass away, and they have minor children. The child with special needs is going to get nothing because there's nothing set up for that. So what we have to think about is where do we put the money that we have, and that's what we're going to talk about today. There's really 2 options. There's a special needs trust, and there's also able accounts. But in Ohio, we refer to those as stable accounts because that's the name of them. And if you're a resident of Ohio, there's no reason not to use the Ohio stable account. If you're a resident of another state listening in, you have to you can pick a stable account. You can only pick one in the United States, but I'm going to just talk about it as a resident of Ohio. Non-Ohio residents can use the stable account, but they might not want to. But I'm just going to presume we're all residents of Ohio. All right, so stable accounts were created fairly recently, And they were brought about through the Down Syndrome Association. They were the big people pushing for that. And they allowed people these bank accounts that you could put a small amount of money in each year. But there are a lot of limitations on it. There still are, in my opinion. So the big limitation on stable account, it's kind of set up to be like a 529 plan. So I can only put so much in each year. And every year it changes. And right now that's about $20,000. And I'm just going to say about because I think it's 20,000. And you put $20,000 a year into a stable account. Now, if the beneficiary of the account is working, they can put actually quite a bit more. They can put if they make like say 20,000 a year, they could put another $14,000 a year into the stable account. But if you think about that, if all I can put into a stable account is at most about $34,000 a year, you and I can't use the stable account as a means of leaving an inheritance to a family member because we don't know exactly how much we're putting in the account, number one. And if they've already put some money in, then the other money gets kicked out. It's not perfect. So, but the perfect way to do it is to do a special needs trust. And so a special needs trust is a vehicle, and that's the best word to use. It's a vehicle for you to give money to somebody, and they're going to get the benefit of all the money in the account, but it isn't theirs. And so that means it doesn't count as an asset or a resource, which means it does not impact their benefits. And that's true if you and I leave money for a family member or a friend or anyone else who has a special need, who gets Medicaid, who's on the waiver. So not just the health insurance, but the waivers. And our IO, our self, our help, any of those waivers, or they're on Medicaid health. It doesn't matter if they're in a group home setting. Any of those situations where DD service is providing for them, they are on Medicaid. And we do not want to leave them money directly because if we do, they would potentially lose their Medicaid. They wouldn't. Ohio's really good about figuring that out. So the trust allows them to get the benefit of the money without losing any of their resources. And that's what a special needs trust is. There used to be one called supplemental services trust. No one uses those anymore. If you hear about them, no, we don't use. They all have what's called a payback provision, so no one likes those. So what do I have to think about when I talk about a trust? Well, who's going to write the trust? Who's going to literally write the document, right? And then who's going to make sure that it's all good and that it will preserve their benefits, that they get to use the money and only they get to use the money and they get to keep all their benefits. Well, that's step one. And there's two main options that you can do. You can use a pooled trust organization. And in Ohio, nationwide, those are nonprofits. They are nonprofits that are going to keep the money for your child, and they're going to invest it, and they're going to make a determination. They're going to be the trustee, or they're going to hire the trustee who's going to invest the money, and the nonprofit is going to decide whether or not the money can be taken out of the trust and used to purchase X, Y, and Z. So why do we like pooled trusts? Well, we like pooled trusts because they're very inexpensive to manage year to year. That's why. And if we don't have relatives around to handle them, that's also kind of really nice. And the other big thing we like about them is they've written the trust document. The trust exists. You don't have to do anything. You're just going to join. That's what you join their trust, and they're pooled. So they have 2,000 accounts, and they have $2 million in the accounts. I'm trying to come up with good math for me. I'm not sure I've done that, but whatever. And then you invest 100,000, so now they have 2.1 million, and you're their 2001. You still own your 100,000. But the advantage of the pooled is then when they go and they buy Apple stock, and they do one transaction, they buy 10,000 shares of Apple stock. That's one fee that's dispersed among 2,001 accounts. And so they're significantly less expensive to run. The downside to them, and we'll come back to, is that they also probably don't invest them as they're not as aggressive as you might want to be. All right. So then instead, especially if you have a lot of money, or we'll talk about this later, if your main asset that you're going to leave to your child is an inherited IRA, you're really going to want to look at a private trust. So usually in a private trust, you have to hire an attorney who understands Medicaid and Social Security, and that's really important, and they are going to draft the trust. So the downside to that is, because you're hiring that attorney to create the trust, you are going to pay a lot more than you would in a pooled trust. Like the setup cost of a pooled trust is going to be it's going to be fixed. It's not going to be that much comparatively as a private trust. The upside to the downside to the pooled trust, in my opinion, is the question I always ask people. I'm like, what's your plan when you pass away? Where's your child going to live? And when they say, we want them to live in the house. Okay. Pooled trusts don't deal with houses. There's one, it's called Anchor, and they are trying that, but they're younger and they're smaller, and so that is concerning. But pooled trusts don't do houses. They take cash and not houses. And so because of that, if you want the child to live in the home, the family home, then we usually recommend that you do a private trust. Now, I will say when I do a private trust, I always say the trustee can move money into a pooled trust, so we hedge our bets. But the trick, so the most important thing here with a private trust is hiring an attorney who knows what they're doing. You don't have to hire me; it's fine. I don't care. There's a bunch of us out there who know what we're doing, but you've got, your cousin who has a child with special needs doesn't mean that your cousin who's the attorney with a child with special needs actually knows what they're doing. Just to be clear, the big case in Ohio about how a trust can be really poorly written is a family member who was an attorney who drafted a trust who didn't know what they were doing. So just, you want to ask questions. You want to make sure the attorney is dealing with this. It shouldn't be their only special needs trust. And so you should ask them about the waivers. Can you tell me what type of waivers my child might want? Because what you oftentimes get is like, well, there's the assisted living waiver or the nursing home waiver or passport. Those are for elderly people. They are not for people with developmental disabilities. And I'm not saying those attorneys don't know what they're doing, but they might not understand the consequences of making a mistake in the trust. And there's a very famous case in Athens County where mom had worked for the state of Ohio. And so their child was not going to need Medicaid health insurance because the child got her OPERS health insurance for the rest of his life. Okay, great. Well, the problem was mom just kept saying to the attorney, don't worry about Medicaid, they're taken care of. Don't worry about Medicaid, they're taken care of. And this attorney was like, okay, they don't need Medicaid. Except as soon as mom died, who was taking care of the kid? Nobody. There were no family members. The kid was going to go on the IO waiver, and county was going to provide services to keep the kid in the home. Except the attorney had not drafted the trust properly, and all of the assets, all of the money was an available resource for the kid. And so they were not eligible for Medicaid because of that. So that kind of a misunderstanding can cause a lot of problems. I mean, for the record, eventually the child was, I didn't really think she'd do that. Come here. I didn't, eventually she was put on Medicaid. He did get on Medicaid, but by doing that, it's because we put all the money into what's called a payback trust, which means whatever they used in their lifetime went to Ohio Department of Medicaid. So sorry, I was just trying to catch the puppy. Puppies are very loud when they bark. I thought she would be gone. Okay, so anyway, so a pooled trust, so a private trust, that you've got to make sure what the attorney knows what they're doing. You should ask them what SSI is, SSDI. They should know what these terms are, and if they're not familiar with them, you might want to be concerned, because it means they might be an elder law attorney but not really understand special needs, because it is slightly different. And that's important because we really need them to draft a good trust. And again, like I said, the private trust, the pooled trust, it's already written. So that's really easy. All right. So now we're going to scroll down just a little bit about who makes the decisions about getting the money out of these trusts. So in all of these trusts, somebody has to go, and in the stable account, somebody has to request the money from the account to be paid. I'm going to explain. Stable account is kind of easiest. So whoever has the username and password to stable account controls where the money's going. Now, also a stable account, you can have a credit card, which is great, and so the individual with the disability, they can have their own credit card and be able to access the accounts and use that. But my concern with stable account is and has always been there's no oversight. If I get the username and password, I can wipe out that account. And Social Security doesn't even really look into it. So there's really no oversight. So it's great when mom and dad are alive to use it as a funding mechanism. Also, if the individual is really high functioning and they can oversee their own account, that's great. But sometimes stable account can be a little bit iffy if you're not sure who's going to have access to it. For the record, Lifespan, who we talk about over here in the pool trust, Lifespan, they can also be overseeing the stable account. So that is something to remember, or some charity. All right, so able accounts, stable accounts, whoever has the password, they can do that. A private trust, usually, well, the trustee in both the private and the pool trust technically decide whether or not money comes out. And in a private trust, I personally don't I recommend mom and dad are the trustees, but once they pass away, I usually am really big on, you know what you should do? You should name a bank as the trustee. Why? Well, because banks don't ever take the money. They don't care. They don't. And so we usually say, you know, we have a private trust, private trustee, and then what we have, trust advisors in private trust. And a trust advisor is the sibling, the uncle, the cousin, the social worker who had a special bond with your child and has said they want to stay involved in their life forever after. And so they get to go to the bank, who's the trustee, and say, hey, bank, how much money is in here? Or, you know, Johnny needs a new pair of shoes, or Johnny wants to go to Disney World. And so can you make that happen? And so these are a lot of different people. There are a lot of people you can name who can be involved with on behalf of Johnny and make the request to the bank to get access to the money. Now, in the pooled trusts, they all have the trust advisor, and that's going to be your anchor, your community fund, your Dayton disability. Those are the big ones in Ohio. They're going to be the people who decide whether or not the money gets dispersed. The trustee is the bank who's investing the money, and the trust is the charitable organization. They're deciding whether or not the money gets dispersed. And for the record, in both of these trusts, in a special needs trust, the trustee is supposed to disperse money. Their job is to get as much money to the individual with a disability as possible during their lifetime, so that they can have the best life they can have. That's what it's for. And that's important to know, because in a private trust, in a non-special needs trust, my job as the trustee is to save as much money as I can for the next generation. That's not true in these trusts. These trusts, the purpose is to go to Disney, get dental work done, you know, buy a new couch, get a puppy. And I have a puppy for them to adopt if they would like to get a puppy. And I always have a puppy if someone needs to adopt one. But anyway, they can do that, and the trust can pay for those things. All right. So, and usually in the pooled trust, they'll have one person who acts as the advocate for the individual with the disability and says, hey, Johnny needs a new pair of shoes. And they have the one person, and they'll have they have other people, but only one person at a time is the one who can make the requests. All right. And so it can be a family member. It can be a charitable organization like Lifespan or Plan. Any of them can do that. And so but they're going to decide whether or not something gets paid. And so the standard is, first and foremost, it has to be solely for the benefit of the beneficiary. So if we're taking a family vacation and there's 6 people in the family, the trust is not going to pay for all 6 people to go. That's not happening. That's inappropriate. And super inappropriate. Now, if the individual with a disability needs a caregiver, then the trust should pay for 2 people to go. So I just had a conversation with someone yesterday. So they're going to the United Kingdom, actually, to see a choir. And 3 people are going: mom, caregiver, and child. And so the trust will pay for caregiver and child to go. but will not pay for mom. That she doesn't need two caregivers, and mom's too old to do it on her own. She can't do it. She can't be responsible at this point for her child the whole time. And so, and okay, and then so the conversation is, and these are the conversations you have to have. How many hotel rooms are they getting? Well, she has to be within auditory distance of her caregiver. So either the caregiver is sharing a room with her, and then the trust will pay for that room, or if it's two connecting rooms, in that situation, it's the only time the trust would pay for the two rooms. But if mom is staying with the caregiver in the other room, then the trust would pay for half of the room with mom, and then the entire room with the beneficiary. Like these, okay, I know this is totally into the weeds, but that's the kind of stuff you have to figure out when you're the trustee. And that's really important to understand, because when you make a family member the trustee, they have to get up to speed with those kinds of decisions. And I don't think most of them can do that. And so that's again why I like to recommend that it be a pooled trust or a private trustee in another trust, a bank that sets in that knows the rules, and then the family member is the trust advisor. So then they're advocating on behalf of their sibling, but they don't have to figure out whether or not this is an allowable expense, an allowable distribution or not. All right, so that's about who's going to spend the money. Okay, so then, so we're going to go on to the next top of the next thing. Yep. Who makes the decisions? Who figures out if my trust is still valid? If you have a special need trust that was written before 2019, it's probably not any good. It's not horrible, but it probably needs fixed. Why? Because in 2019, there was a big case that came down, and most trusts didn't match what that standard was. So if you're in a pooled trust, they know that, they update the trust. If you have a private trust, it's okay, but you're going to need to go back to your attorney, or if they're gone, find a new attorney to update your trust. Now, stable account, the treasurer updates that. That's their job, kind of like a pooled trust. They're the ones that are going to figure all that out. All right. So for the most part, you don't have to worry about it unless you have a private trust. And then I still say, like, every 3 to 5 years, you kind of want to revisit the trust with an attorney to see if this is still the most appropriate way of handling things. And a lot of people will come to me and they'll have a trust that was written before 2019 and it was irrevocable. And I'm like, why did you do that? And they're like, the attorney told us we had to. And I'm like, you never had to do that. And so the attorney didn't really know what they were doing, but okay. And now the problem I have with that is that there's been a change. And so we have to basically throw that trust away. It doesn't matter. There's nothing in it, but all that work is kind of is useless because we have to start over with a new trust. And that's why you kind of want to be careful, because you don't want to have to do a new trust every 3 to 5 years. You want to make sure that they know what they're doing and that you can amend it and you can change it throughout the time, because that is really important to understand. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind. That's the downside. I mean, there are a lot of reasons to do a private trust, and we tend to default to those. But the downside to it is you're probably going to have to go back and check in with your attorney every few years to make sure it's up to date, and to let them know about what changes, right? Especially if where your child is going to live after you pass away has changed. That's the big thing. That's a lot of what we're worried about in these private trusts. Okay, so in all, the other in stable and the pooled trust, it's on autopilot. You don't really have to worry about it. In the private trust, you have to pay a little bit more attention. All right, what are these trust costs? So pooled trusts charge a setup fee usually, and then they charge a management fee, and then they charge a closing fee. But I'm going to tell you, all those fees are probably less expensive than anything near what you're going to spend in a private trust. So most of them you're going to hire an attorney to help you with that. So a pooled trust, you're probably looking at about $2,500 to start it. Not even any money in it, just to get it going. And then most of them shouldn't actually charge you anything until you put money in it. And then again, all their costs are like grouped and then dispersed among all the people, among all the pooled trust holders. So their costs are going to be pretty reasonable overall. And most of them are going to charge a small percentage of the principal value of the trust. All right, that's important. One of them I know charges like, I think, $250 a year plus on everything over $50,000, 0.25%. Okay, think of that. Now, if you have a private trust, and it doesn't matter if Fifth Third Bank or if your nephew or your son is the trustee is entitled to a 2% fee. That's a lot more money than 0.25%. 2% of the principal value of the year is going to be taken as the fee. And even if you're like, well, my son would never take the fee for his sister, but yeah, he will, because it's an insane amount of work, and he should take the fee because it is a lot of work. And so why not take the fee and offset some of the heartache of it all? Also, in addition to that, in a private trust, they're going to hire somebody probably to invest the money. Now, maybe they use Vanguard and then there's very little fees, but if they're using, I don't know, Charles Schwab or Fidelity, there's going to be a fee for the investment advice and things like that. So those things are going to be part of it also. So a private trust, honestly, it just has more fees than a pooled trust. That being said, pooled trusts are not going to get the rate of return that a private trust is usually going to get. They're not as aggressive. And so the private trust should be making more money than a pooled trust. So there's an offsetting of things there. And I think, to me, one of the big things again is what's in my trust, and then who's really going to be the one who's going to be requesting money. If I don't have a lot of people to be able to request the money to be the advocate for my child, I'm going to look more at a pooled trust than a private trust. All right. So the cost for stable account used to be $250 a month, but as of this year, now it's free. It's free. So again, I don't want to say that's going to always stay, but if you're a resident of Ohio, you don't pay for a stable account right now. So it used to be $250 a month. They're doing well, so they're not charging a fee. You never know what's going to happen. So now the only other cost that you have to understand with a stable account is if I pass away and I have a stable account in my name, I cannot name the successor beneficiary. I can't make it payable on death or transfer on death. And I'm not allowed to do that. And so that means now anything that's in the stable account, if you want to access those funds, you're going to have to open a probate case. You're going to have to open a probate case, and that is never cheap. So it doesn't have to necessarily be outrageous, but it's never cheap. So that's something to think about. I mean, again, if there's money in there, there's money in there, and you go get it, but you can't just take the money out. So that's a hidden cost of stable that I like people to be aware of. All right. So now I want to talk about the other big decision we have to make in things with these is does Medicaid come back and get some of the money? So when we think of a lot of people, if you've heard about pooled trusts, they're overwhelmingly talked about when we're talking about there being a Medicaid payback provision. What that means is that the money in the trust is going to go to the Ohio Department of Medicaid when the person dies. That is going to happen. That should only happen. It should only happen if the money in the trust was the beneficiary. So I have a disability, and my mom leaves me money outright. Joey gets, so I guess it's me. So Susie gets $100,000 when I die. Well, because mom didn't set up a wholly discretionary, a special needs trust, just gave me the money. That's my money, and I would lose my benefits. But under Ohio law, I can put it into a Medicaid payback trust. And then now the money, I get to keep my benefits, and I can use that $100,000 for the rest of my life. But if there's money left in that trust when I die and I receive Medicaid benefits, Medicaid can grab that money upon my death. So let's say mom left me $1 million and I used $500,000 on Medicaid benefits during my lifetime. Okay. So when I die, there's still $1 million in there. They're going to take the $500,000 Medicaid estate recovery is, and my heirs are going to get the other $500,000. That doesn't really happen that often. We don't usually see that. What we see is more smaller amounts, like 100, 200,000, and which is still nice, but and then And then I probably have used $100,000 of Medicaid during my lifetime. So there's nothing left for my family. Medicaid's going to take it all. But let's say there's 20,000 in there and Medicaid is owed 100,000. Medicaid just gets the 20,000. The other 80,000, they just lose it. Nobody has to pay that. But it just means that whatever's in the trust is gone. I can also do a private Medicaid payback trust. We very rarely see these. They do show up every once in a while. They're usually, they don't happen a lot, but they do happen. The upside to that is that, first of all, there's a lot here to explain, but basically, if I have a disability and I'm under the age of 55 and I don't need a waiver, I probably won't put the money in a Medicaid payback trust. I'll probably just go off Medicaid for a while. Why? Because if I die before I'm 55, Medicaid can't seek the recovery. That's why. It's a long story, but sometimes I want to do that. But I can do a private Medicaid payback trust if I want to. Like I said, it's really rare. Most people just do a pooled trust at that one because, why not? Honestly, why not? It's just easier and it's way less expensive, and it just seems to be the more common thing to do. Now, if mom and dad are putting their own money in the trust, if they're the ones who are putting the money in the trust, then there is no Medicaid payback provision. So if I'm leaving money to my child, I'm going to put it into a wholly discretionary trust that has no Medicaid payback provision. That's true for the pooled trust. That's true for the private trust. And actually, oddly, it's also true for stable, but for other reasons. So that's why it's so important to plan ahead. If you plan ahead and you place the money in the right type of trust, then there is no Medicaid payback provision. Now, sometimes we can't plan ahead because we get a back award from Social Security, or we're in a car accident, or something like that happens, and we just can't we can't do anything about that. So in those situations, we're always going to have to look at the Medicaid payback options. All right, now here's what's interesting. I want to talk about stable because this is a big change. The way stable accounts were set up is that you had to go through probate to get the money out of that. And so if I was the beneficiary of a stable account, it was my account, and I was 54 years old when I died, Medicaid was not entitled to the money in the trust, into the stable account. All right? It's a weird rule. It's just if I'm under 55, Medicaid's not entitled to it. But if I was 55 or above, stable could take Medicaid estate recovery could take all my money in my stable account through probate. All right, I hope that makes sense to everyone. All right, so in 2026, they changed the rule, and they said that all the money in the stable account is no longer subject to Medicaid estate recovery, regardless of how old you are. And David, the head of the Ohio Medicaid Estate Recovery Department of Ohio Medicaid, he specifically said that the Ohio Medicaid Estate Recovery will not seek money from stable accounts. Now, to be clear, he said that, but I think they will. They'll try to, and then it will be up to the attorney of record to say you're not entitled to this. But anyway, the point is that it used to be that if I had a client who had, I don't know, 100,000, they got $100,000 from and back awarded, Social Security back award, $100,000 because they were in a car accident. I'd put it into a Medicaid estate payback trust because that's the only option I had. And for the record, that's still the only option I have. Because remember, I can only put $20,000 a year in a stable account. So I can't use the stable account for something big like that. It doesn't work. So, all right. So that's something to remember. Now, usually I would leave more of the money. I'd leave more of the money in the stable account in my Medicaid payback trust because it gets a better rate of return. It's more control. I can see what's going on with the money. I like that better. So, but now, because the Ohio Department of Medicaid has said that they're not going to seek Medicaid estate recovery, if I have $100,000 in my Medicaid payback trust, each year I can take $20,000 from that trust and move it into the stable account. This is really important. It's really important to understand something, that between Medicaid payback trusts and wholly discretionary special needs trusts which do not have a Medicaid payback provision, right? Both of those accounts can transfer money into a stable account. And that's really important because remember now, if I have a Medicaid payback trust, I actually want to move it to the stable account because now there's no Medicaid payback if there's money in there when they pass away. So that's new. That's new in 2026, and it's super important. The only thing you have to keep in the back of your mind to remember is that if the person is on SSI, if they're on SSI, they can only have $100,000 in their stable account. Remembering that when mom and dad pass away, most people are no longer going to be on SSI. They're going to be on SSDI. And so now they can have almost an unlimited amount of money in their stable account. It's not true. There's a cap. It's like $500,000. So I'm not going to worry about it. Because at $20,000 a year, do you know how long it's going to take me to put $20,000 a year to get to $500,000? It's going to take me a long time. We're all going to be dead. Who cares? I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to worry about that. But so I can take all this money that might be in a payback trust and move it into a stable account. And by doing that, I don't have the Medicaid payback provision anymore. I'm protected from that, and I might have a little bit more flexibility with the money. So, and the costs are lower, right? Because stable just doesn't charge as much. So, those are all things to think about. The other thing that you have to think about is that between the wholly discretionary trust and the Medicaid payback trust and stable account, there's a big distinction on what the money can be used for. And that is that in wholly discretionary trust or Medicaid payback trust, in special needs trusts, once upon a time, you could use them for everything except clothing, food, health, and housing. They've changed that now. Now it's just you can't use it for housing and health benefits that are otherwise covered by Medicaid. So Medicaid will pay to remove a tooth, but they won't pay to do an extraction. They won't pay a root canal. So I can use the money in the trust to pay for a root canal. Okay. I can totally buy clothes, and I can even buy food now in the special needs trust. Before you couldn't go to Kroger. Now you can go to Kroger. It's crazy. It's pretty liberating. But the one thing you cannot use the money for is housing, which means I can't pay rent. I can't pay a mortgage. I can't pay property taxes. I can't pay gas and electric, trash, water, and probably HOA fees. If there's one other thing, it's probably HOA fees. I can't pay those expenses out of a wholly discretionary trust, either the payback or the wholly discretionary that doesn't have the payback provision. It doesn't matter. I can't do that. But I could spend the money. I can use money in stable accounts to pay all those things. And here's like legalized money laundering. I can take $20,000 a year from my wholly discretionary trust or from my Medicaid payback trust, and I can put that money into a stable account and now pay all those housing costs. All right. That's super important to understand. This is the whole trick, right? This is not a decision of, am I going to have stable or a wholly discretionary trust? No. You have all of them. And lots of people will end up with all three. So if I have an individual who is still on SSI, my first choice is, and they're coming into money, especially if they're making too much money, something's going on that they have money to set aside. I'm going to start with a stable account because there's no Medicaid payback provision on that, right? They have too much money. I'm not giving them too much money. They have too much money. I'm going to start with my stable account. They're on SSI. Once they get close to $100,000 in the stable account, I'm going to move some of that money into a Medicaid payback trust because now they get to keep their SSI and they still get all the money. We don't have to blow it on stuff, right? And then when I'm leaving them money, I'm going to leave it in a wholly discretionary special needs trust that does not have a Medicaid payback provision. And now, once I die, they're no longer on SSI. They're my child. And so now I'm going to take the money in the Medicaid payback trust and I'm going to start pushing it back over into the stable account because now I can exceed the $100,000 because they're not on SSI. So I'm going to tell you like a weird thing to keep in mind. And this is why they all kind of go together. Remember, I told you my grandparents died when they were 52 years old. All right. And they were, my aunt was 30 at the time. My aunt lived to be 84. So in 1972, she was bank, man. She was making bank on my grandparents' retirement Social Security. But that was never designed to last 55 years. No one was supposed to be retired for 55 years in 1972. And so by the time she passed away, she was back on SSI because my grandparents' retirement didn't keep up with SSI, which is horrifying. But if you've ever seen a Social Security statement from people in the 70s, people made $3,000 a year, and that was really good. It is true. I see them all the time, and people did make 3, 4, 5,000. Oh, they were rich. Inflation in the 70s really kicked it up a few notches. So anyway, so that's the one thing I have to always keep in the back of my mind is that if I'm talking with parents who are young, I'm like, if you die, your kid is not going to stay. Unlike most other people, your kid is not going to stay on SSI because it's not going to stay in retirement because the puppy. Yeah, she's really happy about it. I was sick of her barking. I thought this would work. So your kids aren't going to stay on Social Security retirement because they're going to run out. It's not going to keep up with the cost of inflation. That doesn't come up very often. If you die after you're in your 60s, your kid will be on SSI, on your retirement the rest of their lives, most likely, unless you've adopted a grandchild. But as an attorney, it's something I keep in my mind. So, but generally, the thing to understand is that these three things, they work together, and many people have all three of them. And so, and now with stable account not doing the Medicaid state recovery, it's a much better system than it used to be. Now, if you wanted to adopt a dog through a special needs trust, you could totally do that and pay for all their costs. This is Lee. She's a husky mix. Anyway, all right. So I want to talk about like some things to keep in mind. So a pooled trust, excluding a stable, which is by far the least expensive, but it's not a vehicle to leave money. So pooled trusts are, generally speaking, I don't know how that just didn't end badly. They're the lowest cost. They're usually they have very experienced employees who at these pooled trust organizations. You want to look at the rate of return. And I didn't mention this, I don't think earlier, but it was another thing. Some of the pooled trusts keep some of the money. Like they'll keep a percentage of the money. Now, sometimes you want that because you can pick a charity to be the beneficiary of the pooled trust if there's money left over. And some, even if you're taking your money and using a pooled trust organization, they are actually keeping a percentage of that trust upon the person's passing. And you don't want that. You really, really do not want that. Okay, the puppy's found the cord. This is horrifying. Okay. So you don't want that. See, this is the thing. I wasn't going to do this at home because of the puppy, and then I was like, I have to come home. So now I know, never do it at home because of the puppy. All right. So so the pooled trusts, they're the least expensive. All right. And for the record, there are pooled trusts that don't have a Medicaid payback. So that's something to remember. Most of the pooled trusts have an option that's not a Medicaid payback. Why then am I going to use that private trust? Well, again, flexibility. If things change, I have more control over it. There's a greater likelihood that money's going to be left for my other kids. If I'm really rich, I want my financial people to do it, not some bank, that I don't really know. The other thing in a private trust is most people, not everybody, but most people, the largest part of their wealth, besides their home, is their IRA. And there's special provisions that if I leave my child with a disability, my IRA in a qualified special needs trust, then they get to take it out over their lifetime. And and you guys, most of you, you're not taking your RMDs, you're not in your 70s, you don't know yet, but the whole thing is like, once I'm retired, I gotta take all that money out of the IRA. I can't leave it in there. And if you leave it to your typical kids, they have between 5 and 10 years to get that money out of the IRA, which if you die at the wrong time for you, but not for that can be a very heavy tax bill. But if I can put that money into a qualified special needs trust, then the money comes out very slowly and it's not taxed at a very high rate. And so to me, it's a huge win to look at a private trust for that. Okay. And then the the big thing to me to think about with stable is I don't like it because there's not a lot of oversight. I'm always a little bit concerned who has the money after mom and dad pass away. You got to have a plan in place. If you have a vulnerable person who wouldn't be able to stand up for themselves, you could see a lot of money disappear that way. But if you have somebody who you want to help build skills to become more self sufficient with their money and understanding that thing, stable is amazing because you get a credit card and you can give them the credit card. You don't have to, but you can give them the credit card and you can say, okay, they can go to GameStop, this GameStop, not just any GameStop, but this GameStop down the corner, and they can spend $42 a week. They can go to that Walgreens and spend $7 a day. You can control it to that level, or not, if you don't want to. But you can also set it up so you get a text message whenever it's used. You can set it up so you know who's using it, where they're using it, when it's used, when it's being used. You can set up automatic payments with it. You have a lot of control in creating that account, and you can give a lot of control to the beneficiary. And the other accounts don't really allow for that because the other accounts are wholly discretionary, which means the beneficiary cannot force them to give them any money. They can ask, and the trustee can say no. They have no power, but in stable, they have power, they have rights. It's their money and they can use it, and you can help teach them how to do that effectively. And so that's what I really like about stable. But I need you to understand that the takeaway from all this is it's not I'm getting one or the other, they work together. And that's the most important thing to realize. These three kinds of trust really work together. And oftentimes it's, parents sometimes are like, why do I have all these trusts? I'm like, well, because so and so passed away and left him a pension for 100,000. We had to set up a Medicaid payback trust. Then we wanted to, move the money over so they could start using their credit card and go to Kings Island and do what they want to do. So we set up a stable account. And then you want to leave them money when you pass away, but you want to make sure whatever they don't need goes to your other typical kids. So we have to do a private wholly discretionary trust. We could do a pooled wholly discretionary trust, but it's more money than that. Or we have a house that we want them to live in, and so we don't want that house to be sold. We want the house to be in its own private trust, and a pooled trust won't take it. And so sometimes we have all this. And honestly, the other thing we do now because of the IRAs, I'm like, do you have IRAs? Okay, well then we do two wholly discretionary trusts, one that has a poison pill for the non-IRA assets, and the one that doesn't have a poison pill for the IRA assets, and it's insane. And so the thing is, like, here you go, you got 17 trusts, and you just have to let it go. You have to just reckon you should not have 17 trusts, but you easily can have 4 or 5 of these things going, and that's okay because they each have their own purpose. And the long-term goal is to provide as much for your child as you can provide. And at the same time, if possible, leave money for your other heirs, either your other kids, charity of your choice, relative, whoever you want it to go to. It can go to me if you want, unless I'm your attorney, then it can't go to me. But anybody you want, it can go to them. And so just, that's the thing. And again, there are lots of attorneys who do this. And so if you're looking for an attorney, I always recommend you start at NALA, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, which is funny but a lot of the elder law attorneys are also special needs attorneys. It's a lot of overlap. And I always joke, because most elder law attorneys do special needs. I always joke, I'm a special needs attorney who does elder law. That's the joke. But there are lots of us out there who know exactly what they're doing, and that's fine. But you need to reach out, talk to them. If you're uncomfortable with the attorney you're working with, you're hiring them. So fire them and find someone else. So seriously, that's the most best advice I can ever give is, like, if you don't like them, walk away. I'm not kidding, because if you don't like them, you'll do all this work, and then you'll be like, I'm not sure this is right. And then you'll just pay for it again. So just run away. If you don't like them, just start over with someone else. It's fine. So, all right, that's my spiel. That's my explanation. And I'm happy to answer any questions now or in the future, but does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll open it up for questions and see if there's anything in the chat. So 1 second while I stop the recording. But again, thank you again for your presentation. This is, if any of you are like, oh my, don't feel bad. You're not the only one that's feeling that. It is a learning process. So thank you for explaining all this. And let me close the recording so we can get into any questions. 1 second.
Well, I always like to tell a story about how